Navajo and Tibetan Sacred Wisdom, The Circle of the Spirit, by Peter Gold. This book is dedicated with respect and love to my teachers, without whose guidance it could never have been written, let alone conceived. Thubten Jigme Norbu, Tagsta Rinpoche, who compassionately guided this often unwilling student into the beauty of Tibetan philosophy and culture. Margaret Mead, anthropologist, who introduced me to a world of anthropological ideas and ideals. Alfred W. Yazzie, Navajo chanter, master of the path of beauty and protector of the people. Henrietta Yurchenko, ethnomusicologist, my formative mentor in humanism and cultural relativity. And this work is especially dedicated to the spiritual heroes and heroines of the Poba Tibetan and Diné Navajo people who, through dedication to living according to spiritual principles, have preserved the universal wisdom of the circle of the spirit for their sisters and brothers worldwide. The Dalai Lama. In the present century, although we have reached an extraordinary level of technological development, many people remain unhappy. One of the most immediate causes of this has been our undue emphasis on material development alone. So engrossed have we become in its pursuit that almost without knowing it, we have neglected to foster the most basic human needs for love, kindness, cooperation, and caring. This is also reflected in a thoughtless attitude toward our natural environment. Regardless of time and place, human beings cherish a common desire for happiness and a wish to avert suffering. From the very core of our being, we yearn for contentment. In my own limited experience, the source of all happiness is love and compassion, a sense of kindness and warm-heartedness toward others. Our world is rich in traditions possessing methods for developing these qualities. Lately, people seeking such methods have turned to communities that, living in harmony with nature, retain a strong commitment to cultivating the inner environment. The Tibetans and the Navajo Indians of North America are such people. Following the teachings of the Buddha, we Tibetans have derived a clarity of mind, openness of heart, and strength of character that have given us a pragmatic resourcefulness on the one hand and the ideal of enlightenment on the other. In this book, Peter Gold describes and compares many aspects of Navajo and Tibetan Buddhist practice, highlighting the humanitarian principles on which they are based. The similarity of ideas, symbols, and practices between two cultures geographically so far apart is indeed very interesting. But what I feel this comparison most importantly reflects is the fundamental goodness of the human heart. The Dalai Lama, June 1st, 1992. Forward. This remarkable book coalesces the fruits of a personal odyssey that ranged back and forth between two continents over a period of many years. As an anthropologist, I am impressed by Peter Gold's sustained fieldwork among two peoples so far apart in space, language, and history. Typically, most anthropologists are more specialized, more wedded to a specific people or area, but this is not a work of conventional social science or of comparative mythology. Rather, it invites the reader to search beyond his or her cultural framework and enter onto a quest of spiritual anthropology. The Tibetans and Navajos each embody what the poet-philosopher Gary Snyder has termed the old ways. Although the particular fluorescence of their cultural forms can be traced over the preceding millennium, the roots of their traditions stem back into a deep past. Transmitted orally over the many centuries and generations, they are taproots linking back to the Paleolithic, that ancient and formative dream time of the human race. This was the world of the hunter-gatherers, alive with numinous powers, a time when humanity engaged directly the primal forces of earth and sky. So what could such traditional peoples possibly have to say to postmodern humanity? The anthropologist Stanley Diamond observes in his book The Search for the Primitive that the journey of anthropology is the search of civilized urban man and woman for that which has been lost and which may possibly still be recovered. What was lost is primal culture, a world based on community and communion, in which all beings are as kin to one another. The spiritual hero or warrior of the Navajos and Tibetans is instructive in this regard, for in this archetype we can discover the resources necessary in this quest to recover what we have lost, and this process will mean that we begin to see the world from another people's way of knowing, which will inevitably challenge the core of our implicit beliefs and assumptions. As Carl Jung insightfully observed many years ago, modern humanity has sold its soul for a mass of disconnected facts. Indeed, traditional peoples regard our society as fundamentally out of balance. Simply put, we have lost touch with the sacred. We no longer have a vital, comprehensive mythos that gives our life deeper purpose and direction. Without such a guiding paradigm, we drift without a mooring, often feeding hungrily upon the intriguing cultural phenomena of other peoples, perhaps in the hope of recovering some fragmentary sense of the world as a whole. This book invites the reader to a dialogue. In its exploration of the sacred cosmologies of the Tibetans and Navajos, it contrasts these ways to that of our own, and shows how difficult it is for us to grasp them at their deepest level, given our mechanistic, reductionistic worldview. These cosmologies challenge us to go beyond our envelope of culture, that pervasive yet largely implicit system that programs our experience of the world, and we are invited to revision the world as a cosmos imbued with formative powers that animate and guide the unfolding of all life, or, as the author terms it, the interconnected sentience and energy permeating our world reality. Both the Navajos and the Tibetans are earth-based peoples, combining pastoral and horticultural modes of livelihood on the highest interior plateau of their respective continents. Some measure of the intricacy of their sacred geographies is revealed in these pages, given that their cosmologies issue from mountains, lakes, the ever-growing winds of their high desert lands. The remarkable correspondence each establishes between place, ritual, and myth is compellingly demonstrated here, making this also a study in the anthropology of place. The mountains that dominate each of their homelands are not just interesting in beautiful folds in the earth's crust, but, in a Navajo chanter's words, they are the joining point of earth and sky. In both systems, mountains have two aspects: the outer physical form and the inner indwelling consciousness, a power that guides, protects, orients, and renews. For these peoples, the world is not inert and senseless, rather all parts are powerfully charged and alive. For a traditional Tibetan or Navajo elder, the early morning air, permeated by the dawn light, is sacred. Likewise, each understands the vital energy animating the cosmos as a kind of holy wind that flows through us and the whole of the world. How far is such a sensibility from that of most people in the West, we whose lives are encased in a harmonized tunnel of an industrially fabricated buildings, cars, malls, with gazes directed toward computer and TV screens? The typical version in the northeastern United States spends on average 90% of the year inside buildings, and the rest mostly in cars or walking on concrete sidewalks. We insulate ourselves from nature's wind and rain, cold and heat. In contrast, traditional Navajo and Tibetan cultures retain a primary intimate connection with the living earth that surrounds and sustains them. This book reveals many correspondences at all levels between these two peoples, despite their complete isolation from one another. In their recent histories, both have been shattered by imperialistic dominating cultures, the Chinese colonization of Tibet since the 1950s, and over the past 500 years, the Spanish and Anglo-American control over the Indian Southwest. Both peoples continue the struggle to retain their identities, their sacred cosmologies, in the face of secular forces that, in obvious and subtle ways, seek to dismantle their traditional lifeways. Given these contemporary conditions, their valuation and orientation toward balance and wholeness hold a special urgency. Yet despite these harsh times, each people continues to persist, to grow, to change, even to thrive. This resilience in and of itself is cause for wonder and respect. Perhaps their strength lies in an attention to wholeness. How does each group structure the individual's journey toward this state? On the surface, Peter Gould's thesis appears radical, that despite the many outward differences separating these peoples, their inner understanding of the nature of human life and the meaning of the world shows strong parallels. Again, this is a book that goes beneath surfaces to grasp the essential contained within these outer forms. Taking another example, each system employs what the Tibetans call deity yoga as a means of personal healing and mental transformation, as well as maintenance of balance and harmony in the world as a whole. Through ritual and spiritual practice, they create an inner identity with their respective holy powers to effect healing and transformation. In this respect, Tibetan Buddhism, which incorporated rather than denied the pre-existing Bon religion, stands in marked contrast to that of the West, where the arrival of a universalizing religion, Christianity based in the Roman Empire, submerged or destroyed the existing earth-centered cosmologies. The vividness and complexity of the imagery each people employs are striking, even overwhelming, yet this book skillfully guides the reader through this wealth of creative vision. What Peter Gould attempts here is a search at the archetypal or collective level, distilling the key elements of each system without attempting to reduce or distort their respective individual entities. In this process, I believe that he avoids what I would term the symbolic reductionism that researchers often fall prey to when they seek cross-cultural generalizations about the worldviews of very different peoples. That trap typically glosses over the unique features and overall context of a given people and reduces the elements of their sacred wisdom to universal symbols, which are then seen only as inner mental constructs. That approach contracts these cosmologies and their attendant ceremonial practices, rites of transformation and experience, and so forth into the merely symbolic, and becomes yet another Western violation of the integrity of these systems. For the Tibetans and the Navajos, sacred ways of knowing and living are not solely symbolic constructions existing within their heads, but are keys that connect them with the inside of the whole universe, quite beyond the human realm alone. In addition to being a work within a new genre of spiritual anthropology, this is likewise a kind of applied anthropology. It goes beyond the value-neutral and objective pretensions of most social science, which typically involved a not-so-subtle clinging to the ultimate validity of our description of the world. The Tibetan and Navajo systems stand in profound contrast to this. For instance, each embraces and develops balance and harmony as central to meaningful human life. The cosmos is apprehended in a complex pattern of contrasting pairs and quaternities that reflect the drama of this dynamic balance. This balance quite naturally includes a full recognition of the male and female sides of human life and the universe as a whole, and leads to a full expression of the feminine aspect of the divine, casting into relief the androcentric imbalance of Western culture with its patriarchal cosmology and social structure. At a most basic level, we seem to lack such a meaningful vision of wholeness, much less a means of moving toward it, and such lack of vision has devastating consequences. Peter Gould journeys deeply into each of these cosmologies, returning with what the Tibetans might term precious jewels that encode the core of their inner teachings. This book is part of a significant cross-cultural process that continues to grow through the latter part of this century. The inner, often hidden, and certainly by the West, misunderstood teachings and wisdom of traditional peoples are now being revealed. More important, they are being shared, for a new kind of dialogue is emerging between peoples across the world, a groping for new means of recovering or renewing the old ways in a manner appropriate to the tainted time of this modern era. And through this process, the indigenous peoples of the world are beginning to catalyze profound changes in the orientation of Euro-American culture. Toward the end of this book, the author notes a conversation that took place in Santa Fe between a Navajo chanter and Tibetan Lama, which he helped arrange. Subsequently, there have been other meetings between Tibetan Lamas and Navajo chanters, exploring their respective uses of mandala, sand paintings, and other core aspects of each tradition. Such encounters are now blossoming all over the world. Flux and instability arise in a world out of balance. Traditional cultures are unraveling and disappearing along with countless species of living forms, destroyed by the relentless materialism that is disemboweling the very life of the planet and that relegates hundreds of millions of people to lives of abject poverty and suffering. Dark times indeed, but the years of patient work and dialogue that gave rise to this book, and many others like it, make it a beacon of hope and possible renewal. Such books enrich a new ground nourished by many streams. They speak of the primordial way of the spiritual warrior, the hero or heroine whose journey, as Peter Gold describes it, traverses from the real to the ideal and back again. These arising voices call us to go beyond, to discover a new sensibility, one in which each industrial culture might be transformed to serve the deeper spiritual purpose of human life. For those who find themselves at this new ground, this newly emerging center, the search is no longer merely personal. The whole human enterprise is at stake, and we can be grateful that we have allies such as the Tibetans and the Navajos in our mutual quest for a viable and truly fulfilling future for ourselves and the coming generations. Philip Snyder, Ph.D., Executive Director, Center for Religion, Ethics, and Social Policy, Cornell University, Adjunct Professor of Anthropology, Wells College. Introduction. Into the Circle. This book documents shared universal principles underlying the philosophies and practices of two groups of human beings, the Navajos of the high American Southwest and the Tibetans at the roof of the world in the heart of Asia have continued to live what we call a mystical or spiritual way of life, based on how the cosmos properly operates without and within. Tibetan and Navajo life is a process of constant rebalancing and perfecting of one's actions, expressions, and thoughts into an ideal state as benefits each culture's ultimate role models, tutelary deities, and spiritual heroes and heroines of the past, who are remembered and celebrated in myth and ritual. Both groups see the process of living as a spiritual journey, an individual and communal effort to develop each person into the best version of him or herself in the company of like-minded people dedicated to the integration of matter and spirit. This journey into ideal understanding and being is so inextricably woven into practicalities of daily living that in neither culture is there a word for religion as we know it. Our word derives from the Latin religare, to bind back. For Navajos and Tibetans, there is no such concept or of linking back. They are already fully on the path toward the desired goal of the unity of matter and spirit. Accordingly, both are often heard to say that theirs is not a religion but a way of life. Tibetans call the culmination of the spiritual journey by two names. In the older pre-Buddhist way of thinking, it is Tashi, meaning an auspicious relationship with the cosmos. Buddhism added a deeper dimension to this idea by means of knowledge and methods for attaining inner peace and awareness beyond mental and physical suffering, which Tibetans call Sangyese, Buddha nature, or enlightenment. For the traditional Navajo, life is a process of constant mental and physical effort toward a state within that is identical to the greater state of being operating in the cosmos at large. By maintaining and restoring this state of hozho, beauty, in one's daily life, one is capable of attaining the empowered state of the deities, immune from physical and mental suffering. We too have terms for this most essential goal of living. The mystics call the state of mind illumination, and its state of being holiness. The etymology of our word holiness, which derives from the same old Anglo-Saxon root as do heal and whole, also reveals the universality operating at the heart of the Navajo and Tibetan spiritual paths. In their perennial philosophies, matter and spirit, body and mind, self and cosmos, I and thou are inseparable. As such, to attend to one means to involve the other. This state of spiritual homeostasis, in which the body-mind is in its optimal condition within and with respect to the total environment of which it is a part, is the state of being toward which Tibetans and Navajos constantly strive. Indeed, the spiritual way of life has been, until recently, the path taken by all human beings in the course of their lives. How else but through the spiritual journey could our ancestors have prepared the wisdom and ways for us to live by? Indeed, it is evident that humanity would never have come this far without a spiritual basis for the journey of life. And in this sense, one might say that the difficult but rewarding spiritual journey is both the path and the goal combined. In the doing comes the reward. In any event, do we have any choice but to take the spiritual journey if we wish to gain ultimate happiness for ourselves, our peers, and the generations to come? People on the spiritual path of life know, or at least have a sense of abiding in a state between the ideal and the real, the finite and the infinite, the material and the mythic. They realize that to be born into this reality means moving gently, mindfully, compassionately through it, since it simultaneously moves through them and affects their every thought, utterance, and action. When this journey is taken mindfully and respectfully, it leads simultaneously to a deep understanding of one's outer world of earth and sky, and an inner standing of the landscape extending into infinity within one's own body-mind. No wonder that they measure their reality not in terms of vectors of forces, wavelengths, genomes, and subatomic particles, but in terms of life's vital winds and the inner lights and movements of mind. To conduct the spiritual journey properly, all cultures have developed their own indigenous understandings of certain universal truths. In this book, I describe what I consider to be a system of 4 universal principles underlying the spiritual path of life. These derive from studying spiritual ways of life on a global scale, but are particularly native to the Navajo and Tibetan ways of thinking, communicating, and living. They embody 3 ways by which an individual recognizes his or her part in the nature of things, with the 4th principle being the method by which the first 3 may be integrated into the personal journey to holiness. By establishing a synthetic dialogue between 2 exemplary spiritual cultures on opposite sides of the earth, I have attempted to uncover the bare essentials of living a life of the spirit. I have called the principles that underlie the Tibetan and Navajo systems of natural philosophy the circle of the spirit. Both systems envision a special kind of circle. It consists of a small inner circle connected to an outer, larger one by means of 4 lines, creating 4 quadrants. It is a spiritual draftsman's diagram, a sacred shorthand for the 4 universal principles of the spiritual path. The smaller circle is the microcosm, the finite body-mind or self. Yet it is also the source of all awareness and life. The larger circle is the macrocosm, the infinite body-mind of the universe, and simultaneously the fully expanded individual on the spiritual path. The 4 quadrants are the natural movements, energies, qualities, and understandings that operate and affect the microcosm and the macrocosm, the finite and the infinite, matter and spirit in each of us and in the cosmos at large. Implicit in the diagram is the position of human beings who act out their lives at an intermediary point between the finity beneath their feet and the infinity beyond the crown of their heads. Explicit, too, are the 4 principles that compose the conceptual circle of the spirit at the core of this book. The first universal principle, awakening and connecting to the nature of things, is symbolized by smaller and larger circles with their circumferences just beginning to intersect. Initially, in life's spiritual journey, we do not realize our identity with the nature of things, that we and the universe are one and interpenetrate each other at all times. Creation teachings, myths, and explanations concerning the nature of life and thought in Tibetan and Navajo philosophy guide the neophyte into the crucial understanding that all life shares the essential elements of vital energy, both gross and subtle vibratory winds, and the inner processes of awareness and thought powered by these vital winds. Knowing that all living, feeling, and thinking beings share in this life force imbues Navajos and Tibetans with a sense of connection, compassion, and responsibility to all species and beings, including one another. As such, they do not view their world as a field of material resources to be extracted and analyzed. Rather, their realms between earth and sky are sacred arenas, populated by a vast array of sentient beings, seen and unseen, but equally real. These beings live, feel, and think, each in its own way, in the earth's waters, valleys, forests, mountains, and in its atmosphere and cosmos beyond. This realm is a sacred world touched highly by the Tibetans and Navajos, not due to ignorance, but out of respect for their deep connection with its form and essence. The second principle of the circle of the spirit, balancing and unifying earth and sky, also can be illustrated with the two circles. It is symbolized by the smaller one fully within the larger. Here, earth and sky are understood in their metaphorical, psycho-spiritual sense. Navajos and Tibetans have developed vital philosophical concepts concerning the balancing of naturally existing polar qualities, energies, and tendencies. Symbolized by the convenient and familiar metaphors embodied in earth and sky, they include the paired universal tendencies of congealing and expanding, centripetal and centrifugal force, mother and father, woman and man. Both traditions know full well that far from being self-existing polar entities, earth and sky are indivisible aspects of the totality. As such, they are complements, not antagonists, each existing only with respect to the existence of the other. Tibetan and Navajo spiritual teachings place major emphasis on the unity of the two, with the spiritual path wending its way in between. Both systems employ deity images of the great goddess and spiritual hero, who are often depicted in some form of physical connection, to represent the cosmic necessity of balance. The second aspect of this principle, unifying, builds upon this sense of balance and affirms the fundamental oneness of oneself and one's reality. Like mountains which stand at the juncture of earth and sky, human beings stand at the midpoint between the relative reality of the physical world and the infinite, formless reality that surrounds it at all times, and out of which it was formed. Through the powers of vitality and mind, each one can get into balance with the unity of the real and ideal, relative and absolute states of being. Navajos describe this by the sacred invocation Sa'a Nagai Bike Hozho, which can be loosely translated as journeying into old age by way of spiritual beauty. Sa'a Nagai, old age going, refers to the process of constant spiritual renewal leading to a ripe old age, the mark of a consummated spiritual life. It has all to do with one's relative physical reality. Bike Hozho translates as according to spiritual beauty. It deals with the ultimate state of reality, one abiding in the innate order, rhythm, mind, and vitality of the cosmos with which all sentient beings, all people, can synchronize their bodies, voices, and thoughts through the proper conduct of life, which is Sa'a Nagai. Navajo philosophers explain that Sa'a Nagai is the male principle, symbolized as Sa'a Nagai boy, and Bike Hozho is female, Bike Hozho girl. Tibetans express the same unity with several sacred utterances. The most commonplace and universal is the daily greeting, Tashi Dele Dele, or Tashi Dele. Dele has all to do with one's relative reality, the maintenance of long life, health, prosperity, and happiness. Tashi is that auspicious state of harmony and connectedness with the innate process of the cosmos. With the advent of Buddhism in Tibet, beginning in the 7th century CE, the understanding of the unity of relative and absolute realities, the middle way, began to enrich the Tibetan understanding of self and cosmos. It is expressed in the universally uttered Sanskrit mantra Om Mani Padme Hum, or Hung. Om, the jewel of the lotus, Hum. Mani Padme refers to the union of opposites of complementary pairs. These include the goal of Buddhist practice, transcendent wisdom knowing the nature of things, Padma or lotus, and the means to that end, which is the path of compassion, Mani or jewel. But even more essentially, the paired syllables express the union of absolute reality, Padma, with an enlightened relative state of being, Mani, the union of the ideal and the real. Padma lotus embodies too the female state of being, while Mani jewel refers to the male aspect of existence. The first mantric syllable, Om, is the most important mystic sound of Buddhism, for it expresses the sum of all sounds, forms of energy permeating the totality of the cosmos, and Hum is the powerful oral agent for unifying the relative conditioned real-world state of mind with the unconditioned oneness of the cosmos as embodied in the Om. Hum, then, represents the act of merging the ideal with the real, the second universal principle of the circle of the spirit. The third principle is called centering in the mandala of self and cosmos. It is visualized as the smaller circle of self, with 4 lines projecting outward to the semi-cardinal directions. The lines mark out the 4 cardinal quadrants of the unity of ordinary forms, vital energies, and mental processes, with the ideal and purified forms, energies, and ideas that emanate from the state known as beauty to the Navajos, and as the void to the Tibetans. Knowing that real and ideal, ordinary and extraordinary are one, this third principle explores the way in which the two-in-one unity naturally differentiates into 4 phases or aspects, such as the cycle of day and night has 4 periods, the year has 4 seasons, and a lifetime has 4 phases. Tibetans and Navajos artistically render these fourfold states of being, expressing and knowing them in the form of sand-painted circles of the spirit, which herein are called by their universally recognized Sanskrit name, mandala. The third principle has to do with finding one's center in an ideal but terrifyingly real world of ever-shifting and changing actions, energies, and thoughts. Although one stands as if at the summit of a sacred mountain, balancing and unifying earth and sky, one must find equipoise and dynamic equilibrium in the immediate reality. Accomplishing this deft balancing act requires becoming fully present at the center of one's sacred reality, the mandala of self and cosmos. To assist in the process of centering, Navajos and Tibetans employ mandalas that map out and code the model of how to abide at the center of one's world reality. A mandala shows the 4 naturally occurring vectors of insight and energy operating in the cosmos at large and within one's own body-mind, particularly as they manifest in the course of sacred rites and in daily spiritual practices. Despite the almost limitless variation in the sand-painted mandalas of the Tibetan and Navajo spiritual traditions, the directional meanings, colors, and symbols are uncannily similar, and coded as they are according to the same system of logic, the dialectical language of nature. The 2 traditions' mandalas serve identical purposes. They are interfaces between a yet-to-be-perfected real world outside the mandala and a sacred ideal world, whose qualities and divine beings temporarily abide in the mandala's inner sanctum. Navajos know these mandalas to be arenas in which the deities or holy people come and go, interacting with the beneficiary of a particular rite in order to restore his or her body-mind into beauty in the manner by which the rite's first spiritual hero or heroine had been transformed. Tibetans focus on a single sand mandala during the course of Tantric Buddhist initiation rites. The mandala serves as a focal point for identifying with ideal characteristics of the initiating deity and transforming the participants into spiritual heroines or bodhisattvas. Indeed, to live according to the wisdom inherent in these first three principles requires a heroic act. It is not enough to appreciate intellectually these principles of the spiritual way of life. It requires living them, making them the basis for one's state of being. But before they can be lived, they must be effectively seated within the body-mind of the individual through the experience of a montage of sensory stimuli carefully orchestrated under the guidance of a master ritualist. Paradoxically, but not surprisingly, it is only through such carefully chosen physical actions, chants, prayers, narratives, and sensory objects drawn from our own reality that the participants can take on the ideal state of being in the course of the rite of transformation. In this light, the fourth principle of the circle of spirit is becoming. Sacred rites of transformation. It is represented as the complete diagram. An intellectual understanding of holiness must become transformed by means of a highly sophisticated ritual process into a visceral somatic understanding. The person must be reoriented onto a specific daily spiritual path, one formulated to bolster the body-mind's inner strengths and defeat its self-destructive weaknesses. To accomplish these ends, Tibetans and Navajos have both developed elaborate interlocking networks of traditions of transformative knowledge and practice tailored to the spiritual needs of individuals. Some lineages of knowledge and ritual practice are pacifying in nature and geared toward bringing the blessings of the cosmos into the participants' lives. Others are oriented toward dispelling obstacles, both external and self-generated, which in the end are one and the same. But most of their spiritual lineages, called Hatal or Chantway by the Navajo and Gyud or Tantra by the Tibetans, are geared to orchestrating a transformative spiritual journey into the ideal world with a return into the maelstrom of the real world as an empowered, healed, whole, and holy person. When a rite of transformation is specifically geared toward beginning a person's lifelong spiritual journey into the circle of the spirit, it is referred to as an initiation rite. It initiates one's daily spiritual path of understanding and practice by eliciting the proper mental attitude and providing the necessary ritual and philosophical knowledge. A rite of transformation is also called for when a person's body-mind fails far out of equilibrium and requires major reintegration. This disorder of the individual body-mind with respect to the body-mind of the cosmos naturally manifests as mental and physical illness. In this instance, the rite of transformation takes on a decidedly healing character. From an outsider's perspective, the Tibetans' rites of transformation generally appear to be of the initiatory type, while those of the Navajo appear to be used exclusively for body-mind healing. But this is an incomplete perception. Tibetan lamas consistently associate the state of primordial ignorance with a disorder, an illness of the body-mind, and the tutelary Buddhas, or Yidyam, of the initiatory rite, with whom the initiate comes into deep connection, are the healers. The Tantric initiation rite is, at its basis, the healing procedure leading to the cure of the physical and mental sufferings brought on by primordial ignorance. In Navajo healing rites of the Major Holiness Way class, the patient, or one sung over, becomes initiated into a system of daily prayers, chants, and ritual by close identification with the tutelary deities, the Ye, or holy people, Dien Dinee. Indeed, during the elaborate Nightway rite, both patients and general public undergo extensive initiation rituals, authorizing entry into the mysteries of the tutelary deities. Within the structure of both traditions' rites of transformation and the philosophical teachings and rituals underlying them is the metaphor of the spiritual journey. Once the patients/parishioner or practitioners have glimpsed the possibilities of the holy way of being, they must return to their ordinary reality and begin to manifest the best version of themselves. Both traditions emphasize the crucial importance of returning to ordinary life as an empowered and more fully integrated agent for bettering the condition of others. This process is begun by the rite, then continued through one's daily spiritual practice. The Navajos and Tibetans have preserved their systems of psychophysical transformation and natural philosophy up to the present day, making their legacies all the more special. While the majority of humanity is presently going about severing the threads of their connection to the perennial philosophy with the blade of the false religion of materialism, Tibetans and Navajos strive to preserve their precious sacred systems against overwhelming odds by embodying them through a spiritual way of life. Thus, the current predicament in which the Navajos and Tibetans find themselves, their holistic view of self and cosmos naturally orients them toward harmony and compassion, whereas their masters' distorted, self-serving view, the Americans' every man for himself capitalism, and the Chinese every man for the state Confucian Marxism, creates gross power but little wisdom and much suffering to themselves as well as to the Tibetan and Navajo peoples. Yet while the Navajos and Tibetans' psycho-spiritual knowledge, visionary arts, and profound ritual procedures have made them vulnerable to those who aimlessly blast forth along the lines of their flatland reality, their syntheses of the circle of the spirit will, I believe, allow their descendants to prevail along after the out-of-balance ways of life around them fall to dust. One final point. While the teachings of the Circle of the Spirit unquestionably have roots in the very earliest period of human history, like cyclic time, their principles constantly remake themselves in new guises. Indeed, evidence suggests that Tibetans and Navajos had only relatively recently, in terms of millennia, developed their consummate versions of the Circle of the Spirit. The Grand Tibetan spiritual fusion only began to develop during the 7th century CE, while the Navajo system may have taken form as recently as the 11th century CE. But this recent history in no way minimizes their achievements. In fact, their not-so-ancient sacred systems are signs of great hope, for it seems quite evident at this writing that, despite its problems, the contemporary world stands poised at the beginning of the same difficult but fruitful path taken in relatively recent times by Navajos and Tibetans, and earlier by countless other human societies founded on the spiritual way of life. It is now our turn to follow in their footsteps to make the journey into the circle of the spirit. People and place. Tibetans and Navajos dwell atop two of the world's highest inhabited plateaus. The Tibetan Plateau lies at the heart of Central Asia, and the Colorado Plateau lies at the core of Central North America. They rise at the identical latitude and nearly the same longitude, but on opposite sides of the earth. Tibetans who call themselves Poba, meaning people of Po, Tibet, have developed varied ways of life and regional cultures. Many Tibetans travel widely as traders, while others are cloistered in monasteries and nunneries. Tibetans lead their lives as farmers, where water is available, in river valleys. There they grow vegetables, fruits, and barley, Tibet's high-altitude staple and sacred grain. Where grasslands and mountain meadows predominate, nomads live out their timeless pastoral pattern among herds of yak, sheep, goats, and horses. The eastern marches of historical and cultural Tibet comprise a highly varied region, both geophysically and culturally, in the northeastern province of grasslands, lakes, and mountains, called Amdo. Great monastic centers and Buddhist saints appeared among the nomadic and farming folk. It also is the birthplace of the present Dalai Lama, His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso. Four of Asia's greatest rivers originate in Amdo's highlands. The Salween, Mekong, Yangtze, and Yellow rivers flow south through the province of Kham, where they erode deep canyons amid forested and snow-capped mountains. The land of the Khampa people has the greatest climatic and ecological variation in Tibet. It ranges from massive Mount Minyak Konka to semi-tropical forests in its far southern regions of Yang and Setang. Here the Khampas encounter various Tibeto-Burman tribal cousins who live throughout the modern Chinese province of Yunnan and into mountains of Burma, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. The southern reaches of Tibet range from forest and wild rivers, the regions of Pemako, Powo, and Dakpo, to highland lakes and steep rocky valleys leading up to the summits of the highest mountains on Earth. They compose the Trans-Himalayan region of To, which stretches westward to the Karakorums and Ladakh. In the west is the district of Nagari Korsum. Amid its red rock canyons and great peaks arose some of the earliest Tibetan kingdoms. At Nagari Korsum's spiritual center stands the great precious snow jewel mountain, known widely as Mount Kailash. It is the axis of the cosmos for all Tibetans, be they Buddhists or adherents of the earlier Bon faith. The major part of the northern stretch of Chantang is fully the domain of nomads, with a ground-level elevation averaging up to 16,000 feet. It is a vast empty place of raw power shared among several of Tibet's provinces. The center of Tibet, containing the provinces of U and Tsang, combines most of the other region's environmental features. It is also the hub of Tibetan civilization, with its focal point, the 13,000-foot-high capital city of Lhasa, Earth of the Gods. High-altitude agriculture was developed nearby, according to tradition, in central Tibet's Yarlung Valley, and it was in the central provinces that the Tibetan Buddhist system of spiritual living was codified. Many schools of Buddhism later flourished in Tibet's center and contributed to the development of the unique Tibetan state, which placed equal emphasis on the spiritual and secular matters. All the while, the earlier state religion of Bon and various indigenous spiritual systems coexisted with Buddhism throughout the land. Tibetans reckon their origins according to a variety of regional and spiritual schemes. The prevailing Buddhist model describes a series of worlds undergoing creation and destruction. Ours is the fourth of such world realities in this eon. People of central Tibet attribute their ancestry to the union of a saintly monkey and a fierce mountain goddess. Out of their union came 6 children, the ancestors of Tibet's 4 major and 2 subsidiary original tribes. Today, Tibetans associate their monkey father with the Buddhist spiritual hero, or bodhisattva, boundless love, Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, and know the female mountain deity to be the great goddess of Buddhism, Dolmatara. An earlier legend from the Bon religion describes the creation of numerous ancient gods and goddesses through the marriage of a celestial god with a goddess of the earthly waters. From the union between one of their male descendants and various female power beings of the environment came the ancestors of the present-day Tibetans. Regardless of the chosen mythic metaphor, Tibetans see themselves as being of the very substance and spirit of their place between earth and sky. The Navajo people, or Diné, whose name means the people, also know well their connection with their place between earth and sky. The Colorado Plateau, of which the present-day Navajo Nation, Diné Bikeya, comprises the central portion, is an integral landmass rising where Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah border each other. The Navajo Nation's eastern reaches, situated in western New Mexico, consist of high arid steppe-lands of grass, sagebrush, and pinyon and juniper trees, in which Navajos pasture their herds of sheep, goats, horses, and cattle. It is widely cut by vast canyon networks and studded by large red sandstone buttes and mesas, among which are counted several sacred mountains, including encircled including Encircled Mountain, Herfano Butte, and Spruce Mountain, Gobernado Knob. The southern portions of the Navajo Nation vary according to altitude and climatic conditions. They include forested hills, temperate grasslands, rocky canyons, red rock mesas, volcanic areas, and the naked badlands of the so-called Painted Desert. The western reaches of the reservation are very much like the east and south, except on a more massive scale. The western district abuts the Grand Canyon and contains vast tracts of red-hued badlands, canyons, and extensive volcanic fields. Considered a more traditional part of the Navajo's contemporary lands, the west is still dotted by isolated homesteads consisting of at least one circular hogan dwelling and numerous other family dwellings, livestock, corrals, sheds, temporary summer shade houses, gardens, and a sweat lodge. The reservation's northern reaches are composed of broad steppe-lands of sagebrush, studded with spectacular buttes and mesas such as those seen at Monument Valley. Here rises Navajo Mountain, the highest point in the interior of Navajo land. North beyond these landforms flows the San Juan River, and beyond it rises a massive white wall of summits, the San Juan Range of the Colorado Rocky Mountains. At the center of the present-day Navajo Nation sits the home of the gods, sacred Canyon de Chelly, which cuts into the red sandstone Defiance Plateau spreading above the Chinle Valley. In both these locations, agriculture is of equal importance to herding. To the east of Canyon de Chelly rises the thickly forested slopes of Mail Mountain, the Chusca-Luca-Chukai Range. Here, varied species of wildlife are still prevalent amid pine and spruce forests, lakes, and meadows. To the west of Canyon de Chelly rises Female Mountain, Black Mesa, an extensive arid table of land dotted with pinyon and juniper forests and cut by numerous canyons. It is home to Navajo who conduct their herds between summer and winter camps in search of fodder, and who also grow corn, the sacred grain. Here too live the Hopi Indians. The outer borders of the Navajo's lands are defined by four cardinal sacred mountains. These include East Mountain, Blanca Peak in south-central Colorado, South Mountain, Mount Taylor, an extinct volcano in north-central New Mexico, West Mountain, the San Francisco Peaks, an extinct volcano in north-central Arizona, and North Mountain, Hesperus Peak in southwestern Colorado. The four sacred mountains figure prominently in the origin teachings of the Navajos. The oral histories describe a series of previous existences or worlds, one atop the other, out of which the Navajos' spiritual antecedents, the ancient ones, emerged. We now live in the fifth of these world realities, and it is to the center of this world, between the four sacred mountains, that the direct ancestors of the Navajos' four original clans came. They were created by the great goddess out of her own flesh. She in turn was born of earth and sky at the center of this world between the sacred mountains. Clearly, in every respect, Tibetans and Navajos see themselves as crystallizations of the substance and energy of their places on earth. They are the inhabitory indigenous peoples of their respective highlands. With such deep physical roots comes an even deeper conceptual connection with place. Their views of reality, their material and spiritual works, all reflect this connection. But to attribute their continued presence and culture solely to the power of place would be a half-truth. It is likely that informed choices have been made over the centuries regarding coming to and remaining in these special places above the rest of the world. Why did the ancient Navajos and Tibetans finally make these plateaus their homes? I believe it is because they are places of deep inspiration and insight. In addition to being sites of pure water, readily available food, and abundant materials for shelter, the Tibetan and Colorado plateaus provide endless food for thought in their deep blue skies, powerful weather, vivid rainbows, fresh air, snow-capped mountains, vast plains, deep red rock canyons, massive rivers, varied wildlife, forests, lakes, and springs. In both places, one vividly perceives a balanced partnership of the four primal essences, the elements of earth, water, sun's fire, and air. What better physical models can be found for the alchemical distillation of the four primal essences into the fifth essential element, the quintessence of ethereal energy and mind, whose attainment is a goal of every spiritual path? Centuries ago, Navajos and Tibetans each discovered a landscape that was conducive to developing states of being that they call beauty and enlightenment, respectively. It is against this backdrop that we now join the Tibetans and Navajos on their paths into the sacred world of the Circle of the Spirit. Part 1. Awakening and Connecting to the Nature of Things. I am humbled before the earth. I am humbled before the sky. I am humbled before the dawn. I am humbled before the evening twilight. I am humbled before the blue sky. I am humbled before the darkness. I am humbled before the sun. I am humbled before that standing within me which speaks with me. Some of these things are always looking at me. I am never out of sight. Therefore, I must tell the truth. That is why I always tell the truth. I hold my word tight to my breast. Tom Torlino, Navajo, circa 1890. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Albert Einstein. When human beings lose their connection to nature, to heaven and earth, then they do not know how to nurture their environment or how to rule their world. Healing our society goes hand in hand with healing our personal elemental connection with the phenomenal world. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. To Tibetans and Navajo Indians, the earth, sky, and everything in between are not only beautiful and inspiring, they are sacred. Their sacred world is a seamless psychophysical arena, a great cosmos of action, energy, and sacred places in which a vast network of beings, ranging from the ordinary to the divine, live in a naturally ordered manner according to universal principles. All these beings are known to share fundamental aspects of form, energies of vitality, and awareness of mind that are ultimately of the same stuff as composes their world reality. Some of these beings are empowered with the fullest, purest qualities of fully knowing, expressing, and acting. They are called holy people by the Navajos and Buddhas by the Tibetans. The majority of people, such as ourselves, have yet to attain their oneness with the nature of things and tend to constantly fall out of harmony with it. Knowing this, Tibetans and Navajos seek daily to renew their connection with the nature of the sacred world as they strive, by means of a spiritual way of life, to attain psychophysical empowerment and harmony. Tibetans call this state auspiciousness and enlightenment, Tashi and Sangyese, while Navajos call it beauty, Hozho. The first step in developing the ideal state inside and outside oneself requires gaining insight into the nature of one's world, one's perceived reality. In order to gain a sense of one's world reality, it must be explored with the help of a map, the map of myth. Navajos and Tibetans, indeed every vital culture, have what Joseph Campbell called a myth to live by. A culture's view of reality is explained through its primal myth or creation story. Worldwide, the creation myth takes the form of a vividly beautiful, entertaining, educating, and often terrifying script to the stage production of a living drama. It is each culture's consummate story because it tells of the origin, innate order, and dynamics of its world reality. It details a process of striving toward an ideal state of being by ancient people, a journey that must be recreated throughout the course of the lifetimes of each of their descendants. The origin myth contains, in fact, the basic script of illumination for every person in a particular culture. As such, it is the ultimate map by which one comes to really know, one's place in the scheme of things, and how to maintain it under all conditions. A major signpost on the Tibetan and Navajo mythic map is the origin legend. It is an exposition on the creation of the world according to the cyclic movement of time and space. It describes a continual state of flux and rebalance that manifests as successful epochs or cycles of growth or dissolution. Navajos and Tibetans tell us that as in nature, so are human beings and their societies subject to a cyclic life history. It is like the circular course of the day. The brilliant, youthful energy of dawn yields to full growth under a potent midday sun. Life begins to wane in the twilight's maturity, and all too soon comes nighttime's shroud of old age. But rather than marking an absolute end, old age yields to youth with the beginning of a subsequent cycle of life. Similarly, we know that all societies have their natural cycles of life, their formative, developmental, classic, and post-classic or decadent eras, leading to reorganization and eventual renewal based on this eternal pattern. Efforts have been made throughout human history to adjust to these stages in the natural cycle in order to find the still point within the moving carousel of time and space. To establish such a balance between self and cosmos requires an ideal pattern of living, which for Tibetans and Navajos takes the form of a spiritual journey in search of a sacred world. As we enter the sacred universe of the Tibetans and Navajos, we encounter 3 or 4 worlds that are said to have existed before our time. Each of these world realities had characteristics somewhat like our own, and each experienced the full cycle of movement from a pristine state into one of decay and destruction without all of its thinking and feeling beings having achieved a state of holiness. Navajo and Tibetan accounts describe how the previous world realities were destroyed through the cataclysmic arising of one or more elemental powers, including floods, fires, earthquakes, and violent winds. As soon as one world cycle came to a close, another would arise, where Noah-like a few survivors attempted to carry on their spiritual way of life in another potentially perfect sacred world.